Hello and welcome everyone. Today's video is about the newest Alpha 20, which is of course with the hotfix I want to go through all the major changes we did. So for those who are too lazy to read the patch notes or don't get what exactly is hidden in there and how it really impacts your playstyle, for example, because many of the changes are rather in the background and are increasing performance or increasing the capabilities of the AI, therefore leading to better outcomes in general, or rather what we rather want to see. So in general, what I can immediately say or show is if we just leave the game running, the overall performance has seen an increase. So it's running faster than before. Also, in regards to the multiplayer, the 1st of January event is improved so that it's not that hard anymore, because the 1st of January event can easily, desync a multiplayer lobby. So we have been shifting the performance a little bit around, optimizing some code, removing some old or obsolete stuff, and rewrote it better, just to improve the performance even a bit. And of course also moving some events further into the year to spread out the pressure, basically. Overall, we saw a certain increase in performance, which you will maybe notice, maybe you won't notice it that much, but it's definitely there. And in detail, there has been work on the military system, which also had impacts on the performance, of course. And I just want to go through some notable changes. For example, we have some kind of volunteer manpower systems, or they were in place, for example, for the Ottomans, which were getting Ghazi recruits, which was basically volunteers fighting for the faith, coming to the Ottoman realm to fight for them. And it was previously done on a kind of event basis where you got manpower and force limit on the fly, and that was really hard to handle for the AI. Therefore now the manpower is instead distributed into the provinces all the time, and therefore you have just a much smoother manpower pool without fluctuations, and therefore the AI can handle it better, but also the player can handle it better because you know what you are working with and you don't have some kind of spikes in manpower. Roughly the same systems got applied for the knights here and the other Teutonic Order knights, basically, which also have seen these kind of changes in the military to handle their volunteers or manpower, which is coming from across Europe, fighting in the order, basically. And there has been some more work to buff the Teutonic Order, but also buff the knights, which were relatively underperforming in the last patches or last versions, to finally give them a bit more punch. Especially the knights here in the Mediterranean were extremely weak, and the Teutons up here generally always died to Poland or Lithuania or someone who went after them, because the force limit was just way too low for the region they are fighting in. And it should have seen a small increase, like 1 or 2 force limit on top to what it was before, but that's already making a big difference. And yeah, these are basically 3 major techs which get buffed by that. The Ottomans, of course, have an impact that should be more successful in winning here, therefore building up much more faster, or building up more stable as a threat to whoever is in here or wants to play in the region. And the Ottomans are not that of dying to itself, basically. Now, so much to the military or the general improvements. There's also, in regards to that, some adjustments to the wealth and distribution and investment of the estates into military, but also in general into infrastructure. For example, like when you look at Horde territory, there has been adjustments that they don't invest too much into pathing anymore, and that you don't see like roads everywhere in the Horde territory. and not that many irrigations because it wouldn't make sense. They are a horde in the end. But also just to make it more designed as it should be. For example, also the ancient path provinces. For example, here in, let's check where is one. Yeah, here for example in Ismet, here is an ancient path. Also the investment here, if the estates are rich enough, rather invest into pathing here to follow up through the old Silk Roads and stuff like that to, well, have a better targeted investment and therefore experience for the player, but also for the AI, which can handle these kind of properties better, which the player of course can read and therefore follow, but the AI didn't know about them yet, therefore they didn't really use it. Also, of course, the investment, which is handled by the AI background of your realm. So these are the things which are basically, in general, I can't really show off in one specific country, more or less. Now, there's something which is also not specific to a country, but it's a big change. And as you can see here on the trade map, you see a lot of foreign trade posts here now on the map. And basically what has happened here and what we did is we added trade posts for the trade republics. So also, for example, you see one here in Constantinople, and basically it represents the presence of the merchant republics like Genoa, Venice, but also especially the Hansa up here, led by Lübeck, which is of course here. And they now have a presence across the board here in Europe, as the Hansa trade network was quite massive and extensive. And most importantly, you can in fact expand your trade network with that, and you don't need to have a province in all of these regions now. Now the Hansa can in fact trade all around here when it has trade posts established. The same of course for Genoa and Venice. They don't necessarily need to conquer down here, for example, to have a trade presence there, or getting to Gibraltar without wanting to fight Castile or Genoa, Aragon. So that's going to help. Of course, it generates income. So let's, for example, take Friesland, for example, and the foreign trade post that has a presence. There's, for example, 25% presence here from Lübeck or the Hansa League, and it generates income, which is distributed to a small part to the state and to a large part to the burghers of the trade republic, basically, and therefore making them even richer, and therefore pushing more into that direction of having a rich burgher class in these kind of trade republics. Now, let's stick to the economy, basically, which we just already touched. There's been some changes overall. The most significant one is we have been focusing, let's switch to Observer, in fact. The main focus here is to get a better balance between the European, or the West, and the East. And of course, standard, or what you want to do is you want to get to the East, to China and India, to get some cool exotic products there, ship them over. Historically, that would, for example, be coffee, spices like pepper, and also, of course, you want to get sugar or something like from the Americas, where the Europeans built huge plantations and so on. And you really want to get these kind of exotics to Europe. Therefore, the balance we want to achieve here is that the exotics prices are relatively high in Europe. Let's take Prague as a good example here. And for example, Prague here has prices of 16 for exotics, 16 for delicacies. And that's a big target for balance or changes currently, because we want to push delicacies further down in Europe to make them relatively cheap there, but the delicacies rather expensive in the East, and the exotics relatively cheap in the East, and the exotics relatively expensive in the West. So for example, if we look here into Vietnam, you would see that delicacies are at 43 here and exotics are at 13. The balance, or the prices are of course still fluctuating because we are changing a lot of small variables which all can have some impact here. And in that regard, most notably would probably be to mention the new ivory mechanic. So if you have ivory somewhere like here in Guinea, you have a terrain which also has been reworked, so the UI here is more smoother now. It has the ivory deposit now. It's no longer tied to Central America, Africa and East Africa. And the ivory is no longer a mine industry. Instead, the ivory is partly produced as in the game industry. So in the game industry now produces more exotics than it did before. And we therefore have a much bigger presence of exotics in classic ivory producing regions. Now if we look for example here to Orissa, which was historically also an ivory producing region, we have for example this province which has now an ivory tech here, but it doesn't have a game industry opened up from the start because it's a floodplain. But for example, if you go into slightly forested regions like this one, you see there is a game industry present here, which is outputting a significant amount of exotics now. Therefore, the production of exotics has increased across the board here, or has not increased, but rather rebalanced, and there are more potentials now to get exotics, most notably here in Central Africa, which is the best ivory source, basically. So, for example, if you go to Cuba here, I don't know if they have game, yeah, they have one, but it's a relatively small one, but it produces slightly more exotics than the other ivory production provinces, basically. We roughly did the same to pearls, which is also a special deposit. For example, the province here on Sardinia, it had the tendency to develop into a huge development province, like 30-40 development, just due to the pearls, which was quite not the case. And it's now moved into fishing, and fishing is therefore outputting some delicacies, or more delicacies than it was doing before, and makes this province less rich than it was before, but also makes the income of exotic delicacies a little bit more balanced and not spiky in certain provinces because of these kind of mine industries which were present. This also has the impact that more mine industries which are now present, like salt or coal or metal, are classic industries in that sense and are not obscured by these kind of ivory or pearls. What also has been done is there's huge shifts towards changes to commerce and urban industries. So let's, for example, maybe let's tag to the Mamluks here. And if we check out here the capital, Cairo, and we check out the commerce industry here, as you can see now here, it requires naval and industrial as input now to produce the commerce output. Therefore, we have created an additional sink of urban materials, and we are going to explore more ways to do and achieve more need for urban products. And especially the naval input produced some or required other changes now. For example, there has been some small buffs to naval industries here in Africa. In general, there have been more naval industries opened up at start to compensate basically the required inputs now and distribute them more equally across the globe. And yeah, in general, we are focusing on improving the economy to make it more engaging to invest into stuff. Currently, it was rather, you could just leave it running with the auto investor and don't care. But especially building up cities wasn't that rewarding as it should have been. So normally what we want to do is that you have more fun doing the investments here, plan your expansions a bit more on your own, and not just have the feeling that you just throw 10 ducats everywhere and then you don't care anymore. Instead, that you really have a feeling for success here to make it more fun, more engaging to build up. And we are probably going to continue working on that and collecting ideas how we can push that further. Also, one interesting thing which occurred from the last patch, so Alpha 19, we got some feedback regards the edicts which we introduced, and there was a lot of confusion about the city growth emigration thing, because it said minus 10% emigration. We now named it properly to represent what it really did, because immigration and emigration is handled by the same mechanic basically, and a 10% change meant higher immigration and less emigration in whatever case happens currently. Now we recalled it, or we changed it to a more, well, understandable way to call it attraction, to make sure that your cities are just more attractive, therefore you have more immigration. And of course your emigration is lower because they don't want to leave that city, if it ever comes to it. And that's something we applied basically globally to make it more clear what we are talking about and have less confusion about is it now more or less immigration. Yeah. I do think that's basically the main changes which can affect you as a player. And yeah, feel free to play around, play to trade empires, give us feedback how it works out. Especially I'm interested in how the knights and the Teutons are playing along. Of course the hordes here are still a bit of a problem, which we are looking into. We have buffed their CE here so that they have a bit better communication efficiency and therefore have slightly different autonomies in their provinces, to help them survive a bit more, but also to, with the military changes, to have a more stable, let's call it stable, army size. And also these kind of horde or tribal armies have seen big spikes in the past. So you had, for example, small states like here in Arabia, which had massive armies because the provinces were relatively rich. And then you had tribal regions which were relatively poor, which had basically no army, and just needed some adjustments to make it more smooth in the end. Yeah, and in general, I do think the economy side and the performance side saw a huge increase basically in quality and of course performance, and we are continuing to work on that. Therefore, have fun, play Alpha 20 with the hotfix, please. So if you didn't get the hotfix, take it and get it. And well, see you maybe in my next campaign, or just have fun playing it.